A rich single dad sees a waitress teaching his mute son to speak, and his next decision changes her life forever. Heavy rain poured down, hitting the windows of the small diner hard. Inside, the bright lights went on and off a little, giving a dim light to the mostly empty seats. Just a few people slowly drank their coffee, looking at the storm through the window. Stephen Brooks opened the door, and the bell over it rang softly. Water dropped from his long coat as he led his 5-year-old son Oliver in. The boy held his hand tightly, his big eyes quickly looking around the strange, loud place with worry. "Hello!" the server behind the counter said loudly, her voice friendly but strong enough to make Oliver jump. Stephen gave a quick nod and guided Oliver to a seat by the window. He helped the boy sit down and then sat opposite him. Oliver at once started to sway a little, making soft sounds, his small hands moving up and down again and again. Stephen bent closer, talking quietly. "It's fine, little one. Just take a breath. We will leave this place soon." The sound of dishes from the kitchen made Oliver suddenly jump, and then a loud chuckle from a close table made him totally lose control. He gave a very loud cry, quickly got out of the seat, and dropped to the floor. His arms thrashed about and he started hitting the ground, feeling too much and unable to calm down. Stephen quickly moved, trying to lift him, saying gentle words that were hardly heard because of the noise. Before he could pick Oliver up, someone knelt next to them. It was a young woman with a dirty apron and a messy ponytail, but her face was peaceful, her actions unhurried and careful. "Hello, little one," she said gently, taking a plastic picture card from her pocket and showing it. A drawing of a happy face with the word "breathe" written below it. Oliver stopped still, looking at the card. His thrashing became slower. The woman put her hand on her own chest, showing a very deep breath in, then out. She touched the picture again, smiling softly. Oliver copied her action, taking a shaky breath. Stephen watched, shocked, as his son became quiet enough to sit up, his little body shaking but not having a complete breakdown anymore. The woman, Hannah, as her name tag showed, smiled at Oliver and gave him a soft rubber toy from her apron pocket. Stephen's surprise quickly changed into anger. "What do you believe you are doing?" he yelled. Hannah looked up, surprised. "I was only—" she started. "You cannot touch my son without first asking," Stephen said sharply, his voice going through the whole diner. People turned their heads. "I was just trying to help," Hannah said, showing a frown. "He was feeling too much. I have seen this happen before. I thought—" "You thought you would come in quickly and act like a hero? Feel sorry for the unhappy autistic boy and his bad father?" Stephen's voice was harsh, easily broken, with feelings stronger than simple anger. Hannah's face turned red. She stood up slowly, the picture card still in her hand. "I was not feeling sorry for him," she said, her voice firm. "And I was not feeling sorry for you. I was trying to talk in his way when you could not." Stephen's hands squeezed into fists at his sides. "You believe you know anything about him? About us?" he said angrily. "I know enough to notice a boy who is afraid," Hannah said softly, "and a father who is too upset to look beyond his own pride." The words hit him hard, like a slap. Stephen opened his mouth to talk back but made himself stop. Oliver, still on the floor, was looking up at him, with big eyes, quiet. Hannah bent down again, not paying attention to Stephen, and spoke gently to Oliver. "You are doing very well, dear," she said, "truly brave." Oliver put out an unsure hand toward the rubber toy still close by. He took it, holding it firmly to his chest. Stephen found it hard to swallow, feeling the judging looks of the other customers closing in around him. "Stand up," he told Oliver, his voice harsh. Oliver listened, moving back into the seat with the toy held tightly in one hand. Stephen threw a wrinkled bill onto the table and turned toward the exit. Hannah watched them leave, her heart hurting. She had seen this many times before. The upset, the feeling of not being able to do anything hidden by anger. She understood it very well because she had gone through it herself once. She blinked quickly, holding back tears. Stephen opened the door into the loud night, hardly seeing the rain hitting him as he led Oliver back to the car. Inside the diner, the low sounds of talking began again, but the stress remained. Hannah picked up the plastic picture card from the floor and cleaned it with the edge of her apron. "Sad child," she whispered. She looked at the door once more, but they had already left. She did not think she would see them once more. She surely did not think that this short, very bad meeting would start everything she had always hoped for and everything she had always worried about. The rain had finished by the next day, making the streets wet and shining under a faint winter sun. Stephen Brooks sat driving his black SUV, his hands holding the steering wheel tightly as he waited for the traffic light to turn. Oliver was quietly fastened in the back seat, softly singing a song with no tune to himself. Stephen looked straight forward, his jaw tight, but his thoughts were far away. He had not been able to forget the meeting at the diner. Hannah's words stayed in his mind, more hurtful than he wanted to say. A father too upset to look beyond his own pride. He disliked how true her words were. He had spent the entire night telling himself he was right to speak sharply to her, that no unknown person had any right to enter his son's life without his approval. But deep inside, a bothersome guilt had started, becoming bigger with each hour that went by. Oliver had become peaceful for her. Oliver had smiled at her. That truth was more difficult to accept than any hurt pride. The light changed to green, and Stephen slowly moved the car ahead. As they drove past the diner, he saw movement in the mirror that showed behind. Oliver had turned in his seat, pushing his small hand against the window, looking back at the well-known red sign. Stephen made an unhappy face. This was not the first time. Every time they went by the place, Oliver looked closely at it as if hoping to see something or someone for a moment. Stephen shook his head and continued driving. At home, the afternoon went on in its normal calm mess. Oliver piled blocks in neat, color-matched towers. Stephen replied to emails, walked in the kitchen, made weak tries at talking that led nowhere. But the picture of Oliver's face, bright with that small spark of hope, would not leave his thoughts. That night, as Stephen put Oliver to bed, he saw a small piece of napkin held tightly in the boy's hand. A simple, childlike picture, stick figures, a happy woman with a large, untidy ponytail, and a little boy next to her. Underneath it, written quickly, were the words, "Hannah and Oliver." Stephen sat down hard on the bed's edge. "You like her, right, little one?" he asked softly. Oliver did not answer with words naturally, but his face told him enough. His smile was tiny, hesitant, but true. Stephen felt a strange feeling deep inside his chest. It had been many months, no, even years, since Oliver had shown such quick happiness with a new person. Stephen gently moved his hand through Oliver's soft hair, his throat feeling tight. Perhaps he had been too unkind. Perhaps Hannah had noticed something in Oliver that even he had missed. The next day, as they went into town by car, Stephen watched Oliver closely. As expected, when they drove past the diner, Oliver rested against the window, his eyes looking over the parking lot with a silent wish. Stephen held the steering wheel more tightly. He did not want to say it. He did not want to require help. He did not want to let anyone, especially someone who hardly knew them, into the delicate, well-kept world he had made for his son. But he could not say no to the truth. Hannah had left a mark, not only on Oliver, but on him as well. He breathed out slowly, turning the car onto a different street, away from the diner. His heart beat strongly in his chest. He was not prepared to see her, not yet. Not when he could still hear his own angry voice sounding through that small diner, hurting the only person who had shown true goodness. He had to think, he had to be certain. But in the back seat, Oliver gently tapped his small hands on the window, making soft sounds, a smile showing at the sides of his mouth. And Stephen understood with a clear feeling that it was not about him at all. It was about Oliver. It had always been about Oliver. And perhaps, just perhaps, the boy earned the chance to follow that tiny, delicate hope, even if Stephen himself was very scared of the price. The days passed slowly, and the heavy feeling of guilt weighed more on Stephen Brooks. Every night he saw Oliver go further into himself, his strength fading away like a dying light. The small boy who had once piled blocks and moved to cartoons now sat without interest by the window, looking out as if waiting for someone who never appeared. Stephen tried all he could think of. Visits to the park, New playthings? Preferred meals? Nothing helped. Oliver's smiles became less frequent, his soft sounds softer, almost sad. This bothered Stephen more than any night without sleep. On a cold Saturday morning, Stephen watched from the kitchen entrance as Oliver sat with crossed legs on the living room carpet, holding the old napkin with the simple drawing. His small thumb moved over the picture again and again, his mouth making a quiet, soundless hum. Stephen knew what he must do. He disliked it. He disliked how it made him feel like he failed as a father, as someone who protects. But Oliver was fading away, and if he did nothing, he would lose him totally. Stephen took his coat, his thoughts already full of reasons he would give himself later. This action was for Oliver, not for Hannah. It had no relation to her. The diner bell rang softly as he went through the door. Inside, the air felt heavy with the smell of coffee and bacon. A few usual customers looked up, but soon went back to their food. Hannah stood behind the counter, cleaning a coffee machine, her ponytail moving as she did her job. She did not see him at first. Stephen paused, his self-respect fighting hard against his great need. Then he made a sound in his throat. Hannah looked up and her body became stiff the moment she saw him. For a long, quiet moment, neither said anything. Stephen found it hard to swallow. "May we speak?" he asked, voice quiet. Hannah's eyes became a little smaller, but she nodded toward an empty seat. Stephen moved into the seat, feeling uneasy and not right. Hannah stood opposite him, her arms folded to protect herself. "I am not here to argue," Stephen said fast. "Good," Hannah said calmly, "because I do not have the power." Stephen made himself look at her eyes. "My son," he started, then stopped, trying to find the correct words. "Oh, he has not been the same since that evening." Hannah's face became a little softer. "He wants to see you," Stephen said. "He searches for you each time we drive by this place. He smiles when he notices brown hair." He breathed out sharply. "He drew a picture of you." Something moved quickly in Hannah's eyes, something kind but careful. "I was mistaken," Stephen said, the words hurting his self-respect like rough paper. "About you, about what you were attempting to do." Hannah said nothing, just waiting. "I am asking," Stephen said slowly, "if you would come spend a short time with him one afternoon. No rules, just see him." Hannah blinked, clearly surprised. "You want me to watch him?" she asked, partly not believing. "No," Stephen said fast. "No, just be present. Speak to him the way you did before." Hannah paused, her heart beating fast. She should refuse. Her every gut feeling told her to keep far away. She had her own problems, her own delicate life barely staying whole. She had no space for wealthy men with sad hearts and too much pride. But then she thought of Oliver's face, how his little hands had struggled for the picture card, the unsure smile he had given her, and she recalled how it felt to be wanted, even in a very small way. "I am not sure," Hannah started, her voice not certain. "Please," Stephen said, and the strong emotion in his voice surprised them both. Hannah quickly looked toward the kitchen, where her boss was yelling about a broken fryer, toward the windows, where rain seemed likely to fall once more, toward the future she had stopped having faith in a long time ago. She looked back at Stephen. He was not begging, he was not ordering. He was simply a father asking for support, without all the protection he normally used. "When?" she asked gently. Stephen breathed out, relief showing quickly on his face. "Tomorrow afternoon, at my home." Hannah bit her lip. "All right," she said at last, "but only for a few hours." Stephen nodded. "Thank you." As he got up to go, he paused. "And Hannah," he said. She looked up. "I am sorry for what I spoke." She gave a small, weary smile. "Just be better," she said. Stephen lowered his head and left without saying more. Hannah watched him leave, her heart beating fast for reasons she could not fully explain. She cleaned her hands on her apron and turned back to the counter, acting as if her life had not just changed a little. In her thoughts, though, a quiet voice gently said, "Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the start of something new." Sunday afternoon came, covered in weak sunlight. Stephen stood by the living room window, arms crossed, watching the driveway with a tight feeling stuck in his chest. Oliver sat with crossed legs on the floor, putting a line of toy cars in order with great care. Every few moments, he looked toward the front door. Stephen looked at the clock again. Hannah was meant to be there 10 minutes before. He was starting to think if she had thought differently when a small, old car drove into the driveway. Stephen breathed out slowly and went to the door. Hannah got out. A cloth bag hung over one shoulder. She wore blue pants and an old blue top, her hair tied back gently. She looked different here, not fitting in, but in some way right, like a burst of true life against the soft colors of his well-managed world. Stephen opened the door before she could knock. "Hello," Hannah said, a little out of breath. "Hello," Stephen answered firmly, moving aside to let her enter. Oliver's head rose quickly at her voice. His eyes became bigger, and a smile, tiny but clear, appeared on his face. "Hello, little one," Hannah said kindly, bending down to his height. She took a small plastic card from her bag, showing a picture of two hands making a sign. "This means friend," she said, doing the action as she talked. Oliver looked at her for a moment, then slowly, awkwardly copied the movement. Stephen felt something tighten in his chest. Hannah smiled broadly. "Perfect," she said. Stephen stood oddly near the entrance, feeling like someone he did not know in his own home. "Where would be a good place for us to work?" Hannah asked, standing up. Stephen pointed toward the large living room. "Here is good." Hannah nodded and sat with crossed legs on the floor, taking out a few more cards, a small whiteboard, and a set of bright-colored pens. Oliver moved nearer, interest making his face shine. For the next 60 minutes, Hannah helped Oliver, teaching him easy signs with pictures and sounds. She spoke slowly, plainly, never speaking louder, never hurrying him. She clapped and cheered quietly whenever he got something correct. Stephen watched from the kitchen entrance, feeling very worried. Oliver answered in ways Stephen had never seen before. He pointed, he nodded. He even tried to copy sounds, his small face wrinkled from trying hard. At one time, Hannah drew a simple house on the whiteboard and signed home. Oliver tapped the picture 2 times, then looked up at her and smiled. Stephen felt a sharp feeling behind his eyes and blinked it away. He knew he should feel thankful, and he did, but with the thanks came a sudden, surprising pain of envy. For a very long time, it had just been him and Oliver against everyone. They had their own awkward way, their own quiet way of talking. Now here was this woman, this unknown person, getting through the barriers he had never been able to break. Stephen found it hard to swallow, making himself stay back to let it happen. Then something amazing took place. Oliver stood up, holding the whiteboard tightly in his small hands. He walked across the room and pulled strongly at Stephen's shirt arm. Stephen bent down without thinking. Oliver held up the board, his face glowing with joy. On the board, written in wobbly but clear letters, were 3 easy words. "I like Dad." Stephen's breath stopped with pain. He looked at Oliver, at his bright, keen eyes, and felt something inside him break and mend all at once. "You did this?" he said softly. Oliver nodded with pride. Behind them, Hannah watched with a gentle smile, her heart growing bigger. Stephen pulled Oliver into a strong hug, hiding his face in his son's hair. "Thank you," he silently said to Hannah over Oliver's head. She gave a tiny nod, holding back tears. For a short time, the room had only the sound of breathing, the delicate, valuable calm of a new connection forming. When Oliver at last moved away, he took Hannah's hand also, pulling her toward Stephen as if trying to finish the circle. Stephen paused, then reached out and held her hand. It was warm, firm, true. They stood there, joined by a child who had once been trapped inside his own quiet world, and was now, slowly, finding his way free. Stephen understood something else at that moment, something that made him feel both hope and dread. He needed her, not only for Oliver, but for himself too. The idea scared him greatly, but still he could not look away. Later, after Hannah put away her things and said she would come back next weekend, Stephen stood near the door and watched her drive off. Oliver pushed his nose against the window, waving his small hand. Stephen smiled, but deep inside, a feeling of worry began to grow. He had spent so much time being everything for Oliver, his helper, his teacher, his voice. What if? What if Oliver did not need him in the same way now? What if Stephen was the one left alone? The fear spoke softly in his ear, dark and pushing, but he made it go away. For now, what was most important was the happiness in his son's eyes. For now, what was most important was that for the first time in a long while, their world was getting bigger. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was enough space in it for all three of them. The next weeks went into a calm pattern. Each Sunday, Hannah came to Stephen's house, her bag full of things for teaching, and her smile making the whole place brighter. With her kind help, Oliver grew, learning new signs, putting unsure words together, laughing more openly than Stephen had ever seen. Stephen saw it all with an odd blend of surprise and increasing weakness. He told himself it was okay. But the more Hannah joined their lives, the more Stephen understood he was depending on her, not only for Oliver getting better, but for how she made their once solitary world feel less harsh. Not everyone thought that way. "You must be careful, Stephen," Julia, Stephen's sister, told him on a rainy afternoon as they sat in his kitchen. "You hardly know her. She has been good for Oliver. Or maybe she spots a chance," Julia said, putting her cup down firmly. "Rich, alone, single father, easily hurt child. It takes place." Stephen felt annoyed but said nothing. Still, her words bothered him. Julia, not wanting to let it go, secretly hired a special detective. When she got a small, put-together recording, Hannah speaking to a colleague about cash and Stephen's riches, Julia felt she was right. Without waiting, she sent it to Stephen. Later that night, Stephen heard it by himself in his office, the room completely dark. "He is rich. If I do this correctly, perhaps I will not need to think about money ever again." The words moved slowly into his ears, chilling and terrible. Stephen sat unmoving, not believing, fighting sadness. Was it all untrue? The joy? The way Oliver became happy near her? The next Sunday, Stephen waited by the window, arms held tightly. When Hannah's car drove into the driveway, Oliver made a happy sound, running for the door. Stephen stayed stuck in his spot. When Hannah came inside, her face brightened when she saw Oliver. "Hello, little guy," she called out, gently touching his hair. Stephen's voice cut through the room. "We must speak." Hannah blinked, surprised. "All right," she said, putting her bag down. Stephen walked quickly across the room, taking out his phone. He pressed play. The twisted, harsh sound of Hannah's voice filled the area. Hannah's face lost its color. "Where did you get that?" she said softly. "Does it matter?" Stephen said sharply. "Was any of it true, or was it only about the cash?" Oliver stood between them, feeling the stress. "No," Hannah said, moving her head, great need growing. "Stephen, it is not what you believe." "Then what is it?" Stephen asked strongly. "Because from my view, it seems like you used my son to reach me." Tears came to Hannah's eyes. "You believe I would use Oliver?" she said with effort. "You believe I could?" "I believe you should go," Stephen said without warmth. Oliver made a soft cry, holding Hannah's shirt arm, not understanding. Hannah bent down, her voice shaking. "You are very brave, small one. Never forget that." She kissed his head and stood up, her hands shaking. Looking at Stephen, she said softly, "I believed you were unlike others, but you are just another man who sees only what he is scared to see." Without waiting for his answer, Hannah took her bag and ran into the gray afternoon. Stephen stood still, the phone still in his hand. Oliver made a soft cry again, pulling at Stephen's pant leg. "Da," he said softly, his voice full of not understanding and sadness. Stephen bent down and picked him up. But Oliver twisted free, running to the door, pushing his small hands against the glass, looking at the empty driveway. Stephen dropped back onto his heels, feeling nothing. The house felt terribly empty. He told himself he had kept his son safe, kept their delicate world safe. But deep inside, a hurting truth bothered him. He had made a very bad, unfixable error. The days that came next were sadder than any Stephen Brooks had seen. Oliver hardly spoke, even with the few signs he had learned well. He did not reach for his playthings anymore, no longer smiled when cartoon pictures moved on the television screen. He sat by the window most of the day, holding the old napkin drawing of him and Hannah, looking out as if hoping she might still show up. Stephen tried all things, preferred meals, visits to the park, new playthings, but Oliver stayed far away, shut behind barriers even taller than earlier. At night, Stephen sat awake, looking at the ceiling, troubled by the look on Hannah's face when she left. It was not anger, it was deep sadness. And in the times when Stephen was brave enough to admit it, he knew the sadness was not only hers, it was Oliver's as well. One afternoon, as light rain fell against the windows, Stephen sat at his desk, thoughtlessly moving through emails he could not concentrate on. His sister Julia had sent a new message, named "More Details on Hannah." With a breath, Stephen clicked to open it. With it was a link to a longer sound file, the first full recording. For a long time, Stephen just looked at the screen. Then with a trembling hand he pressed play. Hannah's voice filled the room once more, but this time the complete talk was changed. "So, how is the new job?" the colleague asked, with laughter in their voice. "It is not a job," Hannah said, her voice strong but weary. "It is only this small boy. He is wonderful. I do not even know if I am helping him, but when he smiles at me—" She stopped talking, strong feeling making her words harder. "It feels like perhaps I am doing something right for once." "And the father?" the colleague joked. Hannah laughed gently. "He is complex, but he loves that child more than anything else. I would not ruin that trust for all the money on earth." The colleague gave a low laugh again. "Still good that he is wealthy, correct?" Hannah's answer came quick and clear. "Money does not solve anything, not what he is feeling, not what that child requires." Stephen sat unmoving, the blood leaving his face. The words stayed in his ears, removing every bad idea he had let begin. He had not only questioned Hannah, he had been false to her. He had been false to Oliver. Stephen pushed his chair back hard, walking the room like an animal in a cage. His hands trembled with anger at himself, at Julia, and how he had let fear control trust. He thought of Oliver's small hands pulling at Hannah's shirt arm, of the first time Oliver had smiled without being asked, of how he had signed "friend" with awkward pride. All lost now because of him. Stephen rubbed a hand over his face, falling onto the couch as a heavy, unavoidable feeling of guilt stayed on his chest. In trying to keep his son safe, he had destroyed the first true link Oliver had ever made outside their small, lonely world, and Oliver understood. He knew something was broken. That night, Stephen tried to gently make Oliver eat, but the boy just moved his head and looked away. Stephen bent down next to him, feeling unable to help. "I am sorry, little one," he said softly. "I am so sorry." Oliver did not answer. He only held the wrinkled napkin nearer to his chest. Stephen sat down hard against the wall, putting his head in his hands. For the first time in many years, he wept. Not the quiet, secret tears he let himself have when no one watched, but true, loud cries that left him feeling open and hollow. He wept for his son. He wept for the woman he had harmed. And he wept for the man he had become, the one too scared to trust in something good when it was given openly. Oliver leaned his head a little, a small spark of hope showing in his eyes. It was the only answer Stephen needed. The next morning, Stephen made the calls he should have made many weeks ago. He faced Julia, very angry and firm, making her confess to her tricky actions. She said sorry, but the words felt empty. This was not something he could fix with just an apology. It was something he had to gain back. Stephen put a small bag together, only key items, and secured Oliver into the back seat of his car. As he drove out of the driveway, he felt something he had not let himself feel for a long time: hope. He did not know exactly where Hannah was, but he would look in every diner, every coffee shop, every motel by the road if he must, because she was not just someone Oliver needed. She was someone they both needed. And this time, he would not let fear take that chance away. Stephen drove for many hours, the world outside becoming unclear into long areas of broken roads and weak, bright signs. He stopped at every diner by the road, every old motel, asking the same thing. "Have you seen her? Brown hair, about this height, friendly smile." Most moved their heads no, some hardly looked up. Oliver rode quietly in the back seat, holding the old napkin picture. His being there kept Stephen firm, making him remember why he could not quit, even as tiredness deeply affected him. By night, they drove into a sleepy small town, moving around the main road, its central street having unsteady streetlights. Stephen's eyes looked over the shop fronts until they found a dim bakery, Maggie's Pies, its windows cloudy with steam. Through the window, he saw for a moment a woman in an apron covered with flour. His heart beat strongly in his chest. It was her. Without planning, he parked, took Oliver's hand, and went through the bakery door, the bell over it ringing softly. The warm smell of spice and sweetness filled the air around them, but Stephen hardly noticed. Hannah looked up, stopping still when she saw them. A tray moved a little from her hands. Before Stephen could talk, Oliver let go and ran across the room, arms open wide. "Home!" he called out, his voice clear and strong. Hannah took a quick breath, letting the tray fall with a noise. She went down to her knees, arms held out, and Oliver rushed into her hug. Tears ran down her face as she held him tightly. Stephen stood still, every kept-in feeling hitting him hard. Hannah moved back a little, holding Oliver's face in her hands. "You spoke a word," she said softly, her voice shaking. Oliver nodded seriously, hiding his face against her shoulder. When Hannah looked up, her eyes met Stephen's. No words were needed. Everything was shown in the forgiveness and huge love shining between them. Stephen walked across the bakery in 3 big steps, bending down next to them, his hand touching Hannah's as he gently moved Oliver's hair. She did not move back. Instead, she smiled, a strong, amazing smile, and Stephen knew at that moment he could not lose her once more. The words came without thinking. "Marry me," he said, his voice harsh. "Right here, at this moment. No grand talks, no other tries. Just marry me." Hannah blinked, shocked, her hand held tighter around Oliver's, tears shining in her eyes. "Stephen," she said softly. "I know I am not flawless," he said with a rough voice, "but you are the finest thing that ever happened to me, to him, to us both." A broken, happy laugh came from her. She wiped her face. "You do not even have a ring," she joked, her voice shaking. Stephen smiled widely for the first time in what seemed like endless time. "I will get you one tomorrow. Then, if you wish." Hannah looked down at Oliver, who watched them with big, hopeful eyes. She held Stephen's face softly, moving close until their foreheads met. "Yes," she said softly, "certainly yes." Stephen brought her into his arms, holding her closely as Oliver pressed between them, laughing happily. Outside, the rain fell gently, making the town unclear like a soft painting. Inside, under the unsteady yellow light and the smell of fresh bread, a family that was once hurt found itself whole again. And this time, nothing, not fear, not pride, not even what happened before, could pull them apart. They remained like that for a long while, laughing and crying, holding each other as if the other parts of the world had vanished. At last Maggie, the old bakery owner, looked from the kitchen with a pleased smile. "Are you going to buy a pie or what?" she joked, her hands on her hips. Stephen laughed, cleaning his face. "2 pies," he said, "the largest you have." Maggie chuckled and went back into the kitchen, humming. Hannah rested against Stephen, her head on his shoulder. Oliver fit snugly between them. Stephen kissed her forehead, feeling her breathe out against him. This was it. Not the life he had once pictured, not the life he had held on to due to fear, but something greater, something true, something gained. As he sat there, with the 2 people he loved most around him, Stephen knew something plain and real. Home was not a place, it was a feeling, and he had at last found it. Above them, the falling star stopped shining, leaving the huge, never-ending sky and 3 firm hearts beating better together than they had ever been apart. Spring opened softly across the country, coloring the hills with wild flowers and covering the sky in never-ending blue. Placed between the fields was a small farm, its white fence newly colored, its porch sinking a little under the start of new things. Stephen Brooks stood on the porch, a cup of coffee making his hands warm, watching the morning begin. Inside, laughter sounded, a noise once strange to him, now the beat of his life. Hannah had changed the old barn into something lovely, a place for children like Oliver named Hope Haven. Parents arrived from all around, pulled by tales of amazing things. They never knew Stephen was the quiet giver who had bought the ground and paid every cost. It was Hannah's dream made real, and he was glad to stay hidden. Oliver did well here. The boy who hid in corners was gone. Now he ran freely through the fields, his laughter moving on the wind, talking more with each new day. Today was not about special care or fixing things. Today was about family. The marriage was plain, just as they had wished. No huge places, no unending lists of guests, only them, the land that had held their mending, and a few people who were important. Stephen fixed his tie with worry, looking down the path, and saw her. Hannah walked without shoes through the grass, a circle of wildflowers on her head, her dress moving with the wind. She seemed like she had come from one of Oliver's drawings, gentle, glowing, stunning. Oliver ran forward, holding her hand firmly, his face shining with joy. Stephen's heart grew so full he thought it might split. They met under a very old oak tree, its branches spread wide like a good wish. Maggie from the bakery, who strongly wanted to lead the event, stood waiting, smiling broadly over a thick old book. "Ready?" she said softly. Stephen and Hannah gave each other a look, laughter filling the air between them. No words were needed. They were already home. The event was short, lovely, and totally imperfect. Oliver breaking in to give Stephen a dandelion, the wind pulling Hannah's hair, Maggie forgetting half her talk and laughing through the other part. It was flawless. When Maggie at last said, "You may kiss the bride," Stephen needed no push. He bent closer, kissing Hannah with a love so strong and certain the world seemed to sway under them. When they at last moved apart, Oliver clapped his hands, laughing softly. And then, in the quiet that came next, Oliver looked up at Hannah with shining, serious eyes. "Mom," he said clearly. The world paused. Hannah took a quick breath, falling to her knees as tears came quickly. Oliver threw himself into her arms, and Stephen dropped down next to them, holding them both in a mix of laughter, tears, and powerful love that could not be stopped. They remained there as the light grew dim, as the sky turned to a gentle dark blue. Later, they sat on the porch swing, Oliver asleep and curled up between them. They watched the stars appear, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle and new earth. Then, with a quick movement, a falling star crossed the sky, shining bright and strong against the night. Hannah took a quick breath and pointed. "See," she said softly. Stephen looked where she pointed, smiling. "A wish?" he asked softly. She moved her head, her voice full of strong feeling. "No," she said. "A pledge." Stephen held his arm tighter around her, gently kissing her temple. "Whatever happens," he said softly. "Whatever troubles, we keep this." "This," Hannah repeated, gently moving her fingers through Oliver's hair. "Our untidy, lovely, flawed family." Stephen closed his eyes, feeling the truth of it set deep inside him. They had been lost. They had shattered. They had almost quit. But love, true, strong, flawed love, had put them back together in ways he had never been brave enough to imagine. He looked down at the two people he loved most, their faces shining in the gentle starlight. Home was not a place. It was a feeling, and they had at last found it. Above them, the falling star stopped shining, leaving the huge, never-ending sky and three firm hearts beating better together than they had ever been apart. In a world that often feels too much, where hope can seem just too far, Stephen, Hannah, and small Oliver show us a strong truth. Family is not about being perfect. It is about love. It is about standing together through hard times, fixing the hurt parts, and making a home from happiness, saying sorry, and new opportunities. Thank you for coming with us on this lovely trip of mending, belief, and full love. If stories like this move your heart and help you remember the strength we all have inside, we ask you to sign up for the gentle side of life. Here, we tell tales that make you think, help you get better, and honor the amazing power of people connecting. Stay with us for more true, feeling stories that touch the spirit. Until next time, may you always have faith in the beauty of new opportunities.